Coming up tonight, the skies get a little bit gray and the seas get a little bit whiter. The captain welcomes all the guests on board, and the Royal Theatre opens its first production show of the sailing with The Gift. It's all coming up, so let's set sail. Welcome to day 2 of the cruise view. I'm on board the Anthem of the Seas. Of course, the second Quantum class ship and the one that is based out of Bayonne, New Jersey, making it the only one in this part of the world. And today was Tuesday, April 18th, 2017, and of course another sea day as we make our way down to the Southern Caribbean. Our top stories for today: food. Kind of an odd one, but it was the big story today, at least in my opinion, because once again we found that the Anthem is not following tradition. It is not doing even what the Harmony of the Seas does. It is making its own waves and doing things the way that it feels is best. And today, it was several food discoveries that I found, starting with mainly around breakfast, really. So Sereno's typically opens at about 11 a.m. on ships, providing guests an opportunity to have lunch, and stays open till about 3, 4 a.m., providing a late night snack of pizza. But one of the things, if you watch the Harmony sailing that I mentioned, was why don't they have breakfast pizza? Anthem does it. She opens every morning for breakfast, offering a variety of breakfast pizzas, as well as the kinds of things you normally find in the 270 Cafe. Waffles, pancakes, burritos, different items like that. And in addition to Sereno's doing things differently for breakfast, Solarium Bistro is doing things differently as well. They have removed lunch and instead are offering a simple brunch that goes from morning straight through to lunchtime. So for anyone that chooses to sleep in, you can still head up there to get a nice bite of lunch, even later in the day when the other venues all start to end about 10 a.m. So if you're a late sleeper, for breakfast, head up to there in the morning. But as for our location today, of course, as I mentioned, we were at sea, making our way down south to Puerto Rico. Our noontime location was 35 degrees and 6 minutes north by 71 degrees and 32 minutes west. At the time, the closest land was Cape Hatteras, roughly 196 miles away. And of course, this is an area that is typically a little rougher. And for our weather today, seas weren't rough, not in my opinion anyway, but they were not as smooth as yesterday. We had a sunrise this morning at 6:10 a.m. and tonight, under some nicer conditions, a sunset at 7:16 p.m. But for the most part today, we were supposed to, according to the captain, have made it past a cold front and had a beautiful day today, but unfortunately ended up stuck in it. So we had mainly cloudy skies throughout the morning. It was a little bit chilly in the mid-60s, not too bad. You could certainly go out there in a t-shirt and shorts and be fine, and many people did that. But it was still on the colder side, cloudy skies, and we did have a 25 to 30 knot winds. Seas, though, were not too bad. They were a slight wave out there. You could definitely see the waves when you looked out, but you didn't really feel anything on the ship. She held up to it fine, smooth sailing all day long. And in the afternoon, it was supposed to be getting better about noon. Didn't see that happen. Instead, actually about 3 o'clock, we got a passing shower, really kind of wet the ship down. Nothing heavy, nothing like we saw in the Quantum to really see if they've made any improvements to the way that rain is handled on the ship, but it certainly was enough to kind of cover the ship in a nice mist and rain and really kind of wet the outside decks for a period of time. But following that, by about 5 o'clock, things were really starting to look nice out there. It got much warmer. The wind started to die down. The seas were getting much smoother. And more importantly, though, the skies started to clear and give us some blue skies to shine down on. So hopefully tomorrow we'll continue those conditions that we saw in the evening today rather than those ones that we had in the morning. As for our compass for today, for me, it started at 10 a.m. with Ripcord by iFly. Of course, this is something that is exclusive to the Quantum class, available only on the Quantum of the Seas, the Anthem of the Seas, and the Ovation of the Seas. It's one of the new benefits of the Quantum class of sports deck with the Ripcord, which is, of course, a skydiving simulator. So just like Quantum of the Seas, things are pretty much being handled exactly as it was back when Quantum first set sail. The one addition that has been done is that you can now make your reservations ahead of time. So I was able to make mine online using the pre-cruise planner several weeks ago, I think actually 2 months ago or even 3 months ago maybe. And today, of course, 10 a.m. was my time, so I showed up, signed all the waivers, just like the Quantum of the Seas, went through the video tutorial explaining all the different things, like when to straighten your legs and bend your legs, the fact that you should stay relaxed and keep your head up, and basically that most important thing is, as I mentioned in the Quantum series, relax and small movements, because any big movement is pretty much multiplied when you are in that wind tunnel. And once we got our little preview and all our directions, we went over to get dressed in our suit and glasses, helmet, for heading up to the wind tunnel to actually go and do our 1-minute session. Just like Quantum, all guests get a single 1-minute session in the Ripcord that you can go through and experience it. You also, of course, have the option to purchase 5-minute sessions if you would like to get a little more experience, do some more advanced training on it, or simply just have some extra time. Since this is a 12-night sailing, we are actually allowed to get a second session starting on day number 8. They will allow us to sign up for a second 1-minute session. So, of course, come day 8, I'll mention that again, and we'll find out when that second session happens. But as of right now, they're saying day 8 is when you'll be able to sign up for a second session again if you want. If you're on a shorter sailing, like the Bermuda ones, that is probably not an option. If you're on one of the Bahama ones, one of those 9-night ones that go to the Caribbean and Bermuda, I'm not sure if you'll be allowed a second session or not, but it is certainly one of those things on these 12-nighters they do allow, because they are longer, and that is from day 8 on that you can sign up for that second session. Overall, that probably took about half an hour. My time was 10 a.m. to be there, and I think I was done roughly 10:30. So do a lot of half hour, probably give yourself a little extra time just in case, there is any kind of holdup or things take a little longer. Following iFly, I then headed to my favorite place on the Quantum class, 270. Place you can never go wrong no matter when you go there. There's always something going on, and today I got a tip that there would be some training and conditioning for the 270 cast going on at noon, so of course I made sure I was there at noon to check that out. They went through a little bit of stretching and warming up to ensure, nobody gets injured and they're all ready to perform. And then went through some aerial practicing and training, a couple little things like climbing a rope as well as hoops and rings, just to make sure that everybody is conditioned and properly trained to put on these incredible performances that we do see in 270 almost every day of the sailing. And following that, they actually also did 2 different scenes from Spectra's Cabaret. None of the extra graphics, none of the 270 effect of it, but they went through the aerial side of it just to do a full-blown training with the audio going and a nice little rehearsal there. So if you weren't there, you got a little sneak preview of what Spectra's Cabaret has to offer. And that was a little bit of a surprise because, of course, on the Grandeur, it's also a public venue for the aerialists to practice and rehearse, but they actually wore headsets so that they could play the music, hear everything. But anyone that was in the atrium at that time would not know what was going on. They would not hear anything. There's really no way to get a preview of it. But on here, they did play that music throughout the entire venue, so everybody could hear it and see that little preview of it. And surprisingly, or maybe not so surprisingly, just like Grandeur, it really is not the same when you see it without all those extra effects, without the lighting and everything else going on with, especially the costumes. You really cannot even tell they are the same thing, but they are underneath the same exact performance, just without all the fluff on top. So it is one of those neat things to stop by and see, and they do that several days out of a sailing usually. So anytime you're near 270, just stop in. You might catch something going on. But for today at least, the big events were in the evening. So following that, I had a little bit of time to explore the ship, check out some of the areas like the Seaplex that I had not been to up to this point and see what was going on there. And leading up to 5:30 tonight, which was dinner time. Day 2 dinner, of course, was formal for the captain's night. And as has happened on many of these sailings, Day 2's menu never really agrees with me. It's never one that I seem to like, even though I think in every one of these sailings we've had a different Day 2 menu. There's just something about that day that just never seems to line up for me. So once again, I did not go to the main dining room for dinner. Instead, I went up to the Windjammer. And the Windjammer, if you haven't seen any of the coverage, is of course very highly regarded for the Anthem of the Seas. It's one of those Windjammers that for some reason when you look online, you seem to see more food coming out of the Windjammer than any of the dining rooms or specialty venues. It seems to be a venue that people really seem to hold in high regard and enjoy the food out of more than I think any other Windjammer in the fleet. And for the most part, it seems like they do their own kind of thing, and that's part of why people regard it so highly. So I went to lunch there today to find out what they kind of do, what they serve, what their normal menus are, so that I could then go to dinner and see how it compared. Unlike Harmony and some of the other ships where the lunch and dinner menus were really kind of the same, they were not. In the Windjammer, they had a completely different setup, not just of the food, but they even rearranged where they put some different items and had a separate layout to it. It was some of the items that were in the main dining room, including the soups, as well as a couple items that were not. They also had some specialty areas like a made-to-order pasta station. But the thing that really surprised me, while they didn't have the overly elaborate desserts that I've seen online, and maybe we'll see that on some other nights, they did have a lot of single-serve items. They had elaborate desserts that were actually specially prepared on plates that you could take. They had salads that were prepared in nice little bowls that you could just take, and I believe those may have actually even been the same salads as the dining room, so it was likely exactly what you would have gotten if you went to the dining room. Prepared nicely in a little bowl that you just take with you. So they really, actually for a buffet, had some nice presentation, something you never really hear about a buffet. And even in the burger area, at lunch they had, of course, burgers and hot dogs, and you could just put them together yourself. For dinner, they actually had some pre-made ones that looked nicer, and overall, it just seemed like they were a little more concerned about the presentation and quality of things when it came to the dinner service than they were at the lunch service. And like the Grandeur, which had a nightly theme, there was a theme to tonight's dinner. In the compass, it was listed as Irish McTimes. On the tables in the Windjammer, they actually had a little card that had a mention of Irish McTimes and some information on Ireland and Irish trivia and information about Irish stew. But for the most part, that seemed to be the extent of the theme. There was Irish stew, but there wasn't really much other Irish food. It was different food than lunch, but nothing that seemed to really fit that theme, not like the Grandeur, which had a very deep theme every single night of the sailing that all the dishes seemed to relate to. This really seemed to be just that one special dish related to the theme. So I'll see if I can get back there any other night of the sailing, see if it is a different selection of food from one night to another for dinner, but it was at least different than lunch, which was not the case on Quantum or Harmony. So that is certainly a much better Windjammer, and the presentation, as I mentioned, was far beyond any of the other dinners for Windjammer. So following that then at 7:15, I headed over here to the Royal Esplanade for something that did not exist on the Quantum of the Seas. Captain's Moment. Not a Captain's Welcome Reception, none of those kinds of names. It was listed as a Captain's Moment, and that truly is what it was. It was just a very brief event. At its heart, it was a Captain's Reception. They gave out champagne, all the usual things, but it did not have a live band performing. It was a roughly 10 to 15 minute event at 7:15 that involved the captain standing on the stairs in the Esplanade, introducing all of his officers and giving some extra information and welcoming all the guests on board. Of course, then it was followed up from 7:30 until I think 8 or 8:30 with the captain taking pictures with guests. But there were no extra performances. There wasn't a whole lot of festivities around. It was a very small event, nothing like we've seen on the other ships. And it was empty. Online, I heard a whole lot of negative stuff about this, that it's way too crowded, you can't see it, you can't get near it, don't even bother showing up to it. I don't know if people read that and didn't show, but it was completely empty. Right up until the event started, it was completely empty in the Esplanade. There were very few people that showed up, and it's true. There really is nowhere you can see it. If you're up here in the Bionic Bar where I am, you cannot see those stairs at all. If you're over by Wonderland, you can't see them. From this top deck, the only place that you can actually see those stairs is from the Izumi overlook. Problem is, Izumi was serving dinner, so you could not actually be anywhere on this top deck and see it. unless you were physically behind the staircase looking at the backs of those officers, which is not a great place to watch it from. On the lower deck, they had the whole center set aside for shopping, and of course the giant pillars block your view, so you really only have that very middle area of the Esplanade to actually stand and be able to see the event. So it's a very small area, yet it was more crowded than I would say the Harmonies event, but it was not in any way packed or even close to how crowded I've experienced some other captain's receptions, even with such a tiny area. So very few people, I think, actually showed up for it. And of course, during those captain's events, we get some information about the ship. And today, we got some information about the guests. We have roughly 4,300 guests on board. The Anthem, of course, like the Quantum, has a double occupancy of 4,180. That puts the ship currently sailing at 102% occupancy. Rather surprising, because it does not feel anywhere near that today. And when you look back at the Quantum of the Seas, that sailing, we were at 85 and 83% occupancy for those two sailings. So this is a lot more crowded than we saw for the Quantum of the Seas, yet it really does not feel more crowded. In fact, it actually feels emptier, because when you do the standby lines for the shows, there are not many people there. When you go into the shows, they are empty. So this ship, on a normal sailing, handles these crowds incredibly well, especially compared to the Quantum's first couple sailings, which were very small capacities. And that 102%, for me, is actually the highest capacity sailing I've been on since the Oasis of the Seas at 105% back on January 2nd, 2010. So it's been a long time since I've had a sailing this high. The last one that was close to it, that was actually over 100%, I believe, was the January Grandeur sailing, the very first edition of the theCruiseView, which was just barely over 100%. So this is a fairly full cruise. Of course, it was listed as sold out when I checked online, but it is not feeling crowded in any way. And then following the captain's welcome moment, of course, night of entertainment. Tons of shows on the ship. Started out with the Royal Theatre with an 8 p.m. showing of The Gift. I did standby for it, did not have tickets for it. And of course, that was a secondary show for the Royal Theatre, even though it was the first one. We Will Rock You is, of course, the Broadway play, so this was their secondary show, and you could definitely tell that this show came in between the Quantum and the Harmony of the Seas. There were a lot of things that are reminiscent of Columbus, which of course it's the opposite. Things that were in this show that inspired Columbus the musical. The entire opening sequence was very Columbus feeling, with a whole mystery of who the story is really about. What story are we going to learn about today? And then just leading into a story about a boat and having a small boat, a tugboat on the stage. That was actually 3 different pieces that could move around the stage and then join together to form a single tugboat. That was one thing that was really cool about this play. They had a lot of set pieces, small pieces, large pieces that all would move around the stage and create different effects and appearances. It was a really elaborate set that they had and a lot of capabilities in it. It, of course, was nowhere near the size of Columbus's boat, but of course Columbus the Musical is the second one to come after this, the one that has learned from it. And the one thing that was interesting about it was it had a soundtrack. It was a very traditional Royal Caribbean show, but the soundtrack itself was a little disjointed. The show was a great performance by the cast, as it always is, and it was an incredible masterpiece of just visual entertainment. But the music and the different scenes were a little disjointed. It would go from some classical music to just random dubstep that could not help but feel like it was harking out to the Ylvis dubstep music video from a couple years ago. And there was also even a BMX sequence in it, which was also a little bit out of the blue and random. And it was a lot of random stuff in a little unusual show. It was certainly entertainment and interesting, but it was not, in my opinion, up to the quality of the actual shows that we've seen on the Quantum and even the Harmony of the Seas, where there was a nice flow to it and really a nice sequence to it. It was a little bit disjointed and random, which kind of took away from just how beautiful and visual the show actually was. And when you watch it, it truly feels like it was in a bad place. It is a classic Royal Caribbean show at a time where Royal Caribbean did not want to be classic. You could just feel the Quantum elements, the screen in the background. They wanted to push the boundaries, they wanted to do something new, and they didn't know if they were capable of, and that's kind of where Columbus came from. This was the show where they wanted to break out from what they were stuck in, that Royal Caribbean formula, and they weren't sure they can, and that's how Columbus came to be, which of course is an incredible masterpiece. But this one just wasn't ready to take that last step, and you could really feel that it was just trying to hold itself back when it should have just gone that extra mile, and it would have just been an incredible show. So that, of course, was 8 o'clock. At 9 o'clock, I then immediately headed across the ship for another standby, this time to the first showing of Spectra's Cabaret, the main 270 show on board the Anthem of the Seas. And Spectra's Cabaret, of course, is a 270 show, which means high-tech visuals, really entirely encompassing an immersive experience, something you cannot get in a Royal Theater, even an Aqua Theater, Studio B. None of the venues offer the kind of experience of a 270 show, and Spectra's Cabaret does not disappoint in that. But I'm not going to go into too much detail on that. I did go at the very last second, had no issue finding a seat, something that was never the case with Starwater. Got a great front row seat in the balcony, so it was no issue walking in last second. But I'll be going into a little more detail tomorrow, as tomorrow is when I actually have my reservation for it, and we'll go into that as the primary evening show for the day. So then, following Spectra's Cabaret, I then returned to the Royal Theater for a 10:30 showing of The Gift. This time it was my actual show with a reservation, so I got to go in a little bit earlier and get that better center seat than I got inside. There is, unlike Columbus, no real difference between where you sit. It is a very traditional Royal Caribbean show. It doesn't matter if you're sitting on the side or in front. It is a very normal theater production show. There isn't that kind of center set piece that breaks it up, so you really can sit anywhere in the theater and still get the full experience of the show. And not only did it kind of harken to Columbus, but it also had a lot of stuff to Quantum. Quantum's main show, of course, was Mamma Mia, and its second was Sonic Odyssey, which featured William Close and the Earth Harp, of course famous from America's Got Talent. Interestingly enough, they also had some America's Got Talent elements in The Gift. They had an entire sequence that was based on the shadow art that has been on a couple seasons. I'm not sure if they actually were involved in any of those groups, but it was certainly one of those same performances where they take people and kind of build shadows and objects and art out of people's bodies and make different pictures. So that was kind of an interesting little element there, and another one of those America's Got Talent touches that have been on the Quantum class now for both these ships. Following that show, it was then about 11:20, headed across the hall to Music Hall to see the ending of U2. Got about one song before it ended, so I didn't get to see a whole lot of that today, but I did get in there to see the one final song that they did perform. And they'll, of course, be back on Thursday in 270. They do 3 performances on board. Of course, the first night, second night, and the fourth night in 270. So that about did it for today's Compass. It was obviously a lot of entertainment tonight, and that is how things will likely be the rest of the sailing. There's a ton of entertainment on the Quantum of the Seas, not just production shows, but tons of parties and other events going on throughout this whole sailing and different game shows as well. So that'll be continuing each night with loads of entertainment. So tomorrow, of course, is another sea day, and that about wraps it for today. It is now only 1 a.m. There's still a couple of things happening around the ship, so I'll be checking those out, but that is it for today's episode of the Cruise View. Once again, I'm Picone. Thanks for watching, and stay tuned for the links.